the homer out of here. The crowd is going, and as he rounds the bases, he loves to egg that crowd on. And proud he should be. He hit that ball a country mile. He just loves to hit homers here in this park.
July 8th, 2015 will be a day that forever lives in my heart. It was the day my grandfather passed away. And it was devastating for me. And not just because I had lost a family member, but more because I lost something far more than that. You see, my grandfather was the closest thing to a father I ever had. He was the only person in my life that ever bothered to listen to me. He was the only person who ever took an interest in what I liked and in my life. He was the only person who really actively seemed to care. He was the kindest, most patient, gentlest, and most giving person you could ever meet. To me, he was a real-life superhero. And he was the only person who encouraged me to follow my dreams and my passion. And I mean, say what you will about how successful I am at doing this here, but without him, I wouldn't be here doing this right now. I might not be here at all, honestly. Now, you're probably rightly confused as to how any of this is relevant. In his life, one of his biggest passions was baseball. He absolutely loved watching the Toronto Blue Jays, and even during the last few months of his life, when he was stuck in a hospice, basically waiting for his time to run out, one of the few ways he found joy was watching them play baseball. He loved baseball so much that he even coached a team for a good many years. A team that would be sponsored by a scrap metal company known as the Scrappers. And I felt that for this July 8th, the 4-year anniversary of his passing, it would be important that I do something to honor his memory. Something that only I could do, and something that he would have encouraged me to do by following my passion. And I thought it was only right that for the one person in my life who ever took an interest and encouraged me to follow my passions, even if he didn't understand them, that I do the same. So this one particular review is in the memory of my grandfather, and I figured it would only be right to cover a topic that he enjoys, even if I'm not really all that well versed in it. See, I've never been a big fan of sportball. My parents very early on decided I should be thrown into football for about 7 years, from about the time I could start walking. And I hated every moment of it. Like, to the point where I would actively avoid sports. Like, to the point where my understanding of baseball is you swing a wooden cone at a leather spheroid to make it fly as far as you possibly can. That is the extent I understand of this sport, and yet it speaks volumes to how easy this game is to pick up and play, that I can actually follow what's going on, and I totally understand how to play this game successfully. It's really that easy to pick up and play. But let's not mistake ease of play with it being an easy game to succeed at. See, this game is actually really wildly hard, and not necessarily for sensible reasons. First and foremost, it is an arcade game. It's also an SNK arcade game, so it likes to kick you when you're down and laugh at you. But even from the start, this game kind of has a grudge against you. See, when you start, you have to actually decide which team you want to play. And aside from all the individual players having goofy reference names, they all have different individual stats. Now that might seem like a no-brainer, but first of all, for an arcade game, that's pretty impressive, but secondly, the game doesn't really actively tell you what these stats are, or like the skills and like advantages of each team, nor does it tell you that there's like one team that is just actively better than the rest, and that like half of them are just not very good comparatively to anything else. Yeah, if you're not playing as the American Dreams, you are actively hobbling yourself because they are actively the best team in the entire game. Conversely, for some reason, the SNK team is actively the worst team in the entire game. I mean, I guess they're played by the programmers, so they're not good, maybe? I mean, credit where credit's due, at least they're being honest to their baseball skills, but, you know, maybe exaggerate a little bit, SNK. But once you pick your team, you have to take the field and play. Now, of course, like any baseball game, you can hit or you can pitch. It doesn't necessarily work all that well. Let's start with the batting, because, let's just be honest, that's the fun part of any of these games. When the pitcher throws the ball, you swing the bat to knock it out into the field. Pretty simple stuff, except that this game really has trouble moving the ball once you hit it. it's pretty common to see the ball knocked straight up into the air for an easy out, removing your character from this particular round of batting. Yeah, that happens a lot, and part of that, from what I can tell, is dictated by the aforementioned stats of your characters. So if you're not playing as the American team, good luck hitting any home runs, because it's damn near impossible, from what I can tell. The other dictating factor as to how well you actually hit the ball is the ball's speed coming at you. And this is kind of random. See, the pitcher can decide to throw a fastball, a slow ball, or one that curves that sort of tricks you as to whether or not to swing for it. But unless they throw a fastball, again, should you actually manage to hit the ball, it's probably not going to go too far. If you're lucky, it'll land on the ground and bounce a few times, allowing you to take a base without getting caught immediately out, but usually, unless it's a straight home run, if you knock it into the air and it doesn't go for a home run, you're probably going to get caught out. For whatever reason, this game just does not like air balls. It's just a lot safer to try and ground your hits, which is really hard to actually control. And that's all assuming you hit the ball. See, this game also has some layering issues. It's really hard to figure out if, when your bat actually makes contact with the ball, if the game decides that your bat actually made contact with the ball. For whatever reason, it's really hard to get down the actual timing on it. It's like there's a bit of a delay, and the overall sprite layering makes it actually really hard to judge distance, and even if you made contact, even if it looks like you did. It's really kind of tricky to play a batter in this game, and it's even worse trying to do so successfully. But let's move on to pitching and fielding. When your team gets knocked out of batting round, they swap to the other side, forcing you to have to pitch. Simple enough. You can move your pitcher slightly on the mound to affect your throw, as well as 3 different types of throw. If you hold down on the control stick while pitching, you'll throw a fastball. Conversely, if you hold up while pitching, you'll throw a slower one, which is really easy to catch an out on. And if you hold left or right, you can make the ball curve in that specific direction. Again, trying to trick the batter into swinging when they can't, thus penalizing them, forcing them to get a strike, thus bringing their team one step closer to swapping with you, allowing you to score more points. Should they make contact with the ball and it gets sent into the air, likewise, you can catch them out. However, it feels like your team just, no matter which team you pick, moves actively slower when fielding. So you can try and actively catch your opponents out, but it's actually really hard. And part of that is because it does that same stupid thing that a lot of baseball games I've seen do, and a lot of sports games in general, where your inputs actively move every person on the team at once, which actually makes it kind of awkward trying to figure out who you need to move and where, and who the game is going to focus on. It's way more awkward than it needs to be. What it should have done is basically designate one singular character to your team to be whoever you're going to play as while fielding, and then have the rest run by AI. That would have at least made it a little bit more fair, I think. But once you catch the ball, you can then throw it to a base to try and knock the batter or any of the other people on bases out. And this I found to be wildly awkward to try and do. Not because it's bad or anything, but just because I think the individual controls are a little bit confusing. You hold up on the control stick to send it to second base, the northern base. You hold down to send it to home, the southern base, left to the western base, right to the eastern base. Now that's actually very, very simple, but once you start realizing that your characters can catch the ball relative to where a base is, and say like you're just north of the most northernmost base, you might try and throw it straight down to try and hit that base, only to send it home. I don't know if this is a problem I personally had or one that a lot of people will have, but I just found that despite it being a very simple control scheme, way too awkward. It feels like you could have probably, again using the same example of someone just north of the most northern base, hold down, throw it to the base that's directly below, and then throw it a second time to home. If you wanted to do it that way. I think that would have been a little bit more sensible. Or again, you could just have most of your team controlled by AIs while you have one playable character, and then that actually kind of alleviates a lot of problems because they'll probably handle it a lot better than you will. I know that's kind of a dumb way around it, but at the very least, it would be a little bit less complicated, despite having a very simple control scheme. Overall, that is basically what it is. It's a very simplistic baseball game, and it is an arcade game, which gives it a couple advantages and disadvantages. First, for the advantages, because it's an arcade game and it's trying to get you off the game as fast as possible to get more quarters, the individual rounds are very, very quick. It's a very, very fast game. And there's actually a shutout rule, so if you lose by more than 10 points, the game automatically ends. Or if you are ahead by plus 10 points, you automatically win. Now conversely, it is an arcade game, which means it's going to be really, really hard. And case in point, I played this game for 4 hours straight. It wasn't until the last game I played that I actually managed to win one. And every other game I played, I got shut outed. Right out of the gate. Yeah, this game is really difficult. Again, it's an arcade game. You kind of take the good with the bad. But overall, as a baseball game, it's not bad. It feels really clunky, and honestly, it feels like there's so many performance tweaks it could have made, and a lot of information they could have just given you. And seriously, they could have made throwing and batting just a little bit simpler and easier to work with, maybe make the whole thing a little bit faster and more streamlined. But as a baseball experience, it certainly is that. It does what it exists to do. It gives you a baseball experience on the arcades, for good or for ill. And as someone who knows very little about sports, I could follow what was going on in this game. It was simple enough to pick up and play. So if you don't know anything about baseball, you should still be able to play this pretty simply. Also, as an arcade game, like I said, they want to kick you off to get quarters as fast as possible. Yeah, unless they actually modify the individual machine you're playing, one entire credit in this game is not going to last an entire game. No matter how fast it is, one credit tends to give you like 3 to 5 minutes. For the sake of, allowing me to at least try and finish an entire game here, I actually buffed it up to about 30 minutes, but even the longest games only ran maybe 15, 20. It's just kind of weird that they won't let you actively play a full game so much as they time you individual increments and then charge you to play the rest, which I think is kind of scummy, but that's arcade mentalities for you. Now, the overall presentation to Baseball Stars Professional on the Neo-Geo is impressive. Really wildly impressive. I mean, first and foremost, it's a Neo-Geo game. That goes without saying, but really, there are so many little things that make it kind of awesome. For one thing, you can pick 2 different stadiums that look visually a little bit different. Not a lot, but a little bit. Every team has its own different color, as well as there being all women's teams and all men's teams, each with different sprites and animations dependent on which gender you're playing as. That's kind of impressive. Oh yeah, and did I mention there are cutscenes that again have different iterations depending on your team's colors and genders? Yeah, that's actually kind of wildly impressive. Someone put a lot of work into the visual design of this game. And the audio presentation, well, the soundtrack itself isn't all that wildly impressive. It works for what it needs to do, but more impressively, voice clips. And actually really good voice clips. My only problem is there aren't a lot of them, and they can overlap each other quite a bit. Like if you hit several single base runs in a row, you hear the exact same line like overlap each other, and that just kind of sucks. It's not very good. But overall, I gotta admit that's pretty impressive, and combine that with the visual design, it is impressive to me. I love how this game looks. But again, it's a Neo-Geo game. I think I'm obligated. Now, if you want a copy of Baseball Stars Professional on the Neo-Geo, cheapest one I'm seeing, $45. That's not bad. I mean, for a Neo-Geo cartridge, that's pretty damn cheap, considering they tend to typically go for like $400 or $500. It's an arcade cartridge. It's supposed to go for a lot of money. That's pretty damn cheap. Now, likewise, you can get it on digital for pretty much every system out there right now for about $10 to $15. That's a little bit high. Again, I got this while it was on one of those sort of sporadic Neo-Geo sales for about $5, $6. And for the amount of enjoyment I got out of it and how much I got to experience baseball, not bad, not bad. Overall, I'm not the biggest fan of sports unless it's some kind of hyper-stylized sports, because I feel they automatically are very dated. But I still had some fun with this. And while I'm not the biggest sport fan of all time, that wasn't really the purpose of this exercise. It was to allow me to experience a little bit of what my grandfather loved. It was to allow me to try and understand what he loved so much, just as he tried to understand what I loved so much, even though I don't think either of us will ever fully understand. It was a moment where I got to try and understand and feel a little bit closer to my grandfather, even if he's long gone, but not forgotten. And it was something that allowed me to commemorate the memory of a very special person in my life. Overall, Baseball Stars Professional is a decent enough Neo-Geo game, and I think my grandfather would have probably loved it. And while I'm not the biggest fan of baseball by any means, I think this game, it's now pretty special to me.
Change. Well, that was was a great game today. The next contest should also be a humdinger between these two fine clubs here at SNK Stadium. The American Dreams, Halt, the Creative Brains,